What's going on, everybody? Khalib's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. Now, as the name suggests, this phone is the successor to the Samsung Galaxy A72 that came out in 2021. And while this phone isn't officially launched in the US, you can still get it factory unlocked through various sources. So for the latest info on pricing and availability, be sure to check out the link in the video description because I'm sure this is going to be changing quite a bit. But with that being said, let's get started. So with this phone, we're getting a 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED Plus display with a resolution of 1080p and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So all around, this phone really has a great display, definitely one of the best, if not the best, of the entire A series. The Super AMOLED Plus display is not only going to make the colors look really bright and vibrant, but it's also going to give us real good viewing angles, so if you're outside in the sun, for example, you'll still be able to see the phone perfectly fine. With the 120Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother, so if you're doing something like streaming videos or playing a game, for example, you're going to have a much better experience, and even when you're just navigating through the phone in general, it's going to feel a lot more premium. In addition to this, of course, we do have that 1080p resolution, so the image is going to be nice and crisp. And again, everything just looks really good and high quality overall. And not only is the quality great, but we also have a really large display at 6.7 inches. Sure, there is a small handful of phones out there that do have larger displays than this, but in general, compared to your average phone, this is definitely one of the larger options. So if you're doing any kind of content consumption, this is going to be a great thing. And not only is this display large, but we also got some good dimensions here. With an aspect ratio of 20:9, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video or playing a game in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a much more immersive cinematic experience, and it's going to look a lot better in general. And if you're doing something like reading or scrolling through social media, with a taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So overall, in pretty much every aspect possible, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a great display. Sure, there are some $1,400 flagship phones that do have better displays, but for a mid-range phone, as far as the display goes, again, this is one of the best, if not the best option. Now for storage, this phone is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so objectively this is a pretty good amount of storage. For the average user, this is going to be more than enough, so unless you have like 50 or 100GB of apps or something like that, then you should be perfectly fine. And again, remember, there is microSD card expansion, so even if you're recording lots of 4K videos or something, for example, you can always offload that stuff onto a microSD card and save some space. Now that being said, even though I personally would be completely fine with this amount of storage, in fact, my own personal phone only has 128GB, I don't really need any more than that. If you're really a power user, if you have a bunch of stuff on your phone, then I could definitely see wanting 256 or more. And in this specific price range, even though this is still technically a mid-range phone and not nearly as expensive as something like an iPhone 13 Pro Max or a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, this phone is still currently going for almost $600 depending on where you get it from. And for a $600 phone, especially considering phones a lot less expensive have more storage, it would have been nice if this phone had 256GB instead. But that being said, again, just from a practicality standpoint, 128GB should be perfectly fine for most people. To give you an idea of what the storage really looks like, as you can see right now, I'm using 42.5GB of space, and it's taking up only 33% of the total storage. So that's really not a whole lot, and I do have a pretty decent amount of things on here. I have all the normal stuff you might use on a daily basis, like social media, streaming platforms, stuff like that, but I also have a pretty fair amount of games too, and those games do take up a decent amount of space. And in addition to that, the system at 23.27GB does take up quite a bit of space. In fact, out of the phones I've covered on this channel, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G definitely has one of the larger system files I've seen. So the bottom line is, whether you're an average user or more of a heavy user, 128GB of internal storage should be fine for you, and you're probably not going to need a whole lot more unless you really have a bunch of apps and games. And while there definitely are going to be some power users out there who need 256 or more, again, even in this day and age with files getting larger and larger, it still does take quite a bit of stuff to fill up this much storage. Now for security features, this phone has a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, which is not very surprising seeing its price range. I expect any mid-range Android phone to have these features, but it's still nice to see we get both options to unlock it, because of course there are some flagship phones like the iPhone, for example, that only have face unlock, and then some phones, of course, that only have a fingerprint scanner. So having two options, whether you use both of them or not, is still a good thing. So that being said, the fingerprint scanner for this phone is right here on the display. Definitely a nice spot for it. I really like this look. It feels real modern and premium, and And not only that, but it actually works really well too, definitely real fast and responsive. And of course, you can also use it with the display off, which pretty much every fingerprint scanner can do nowadays. But regardless, although it is pretty common, it's definitely a feature that I can still appreciate. Now for the camera setup, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. I've always been a fan of the hole punch design. It looks real nice and modern. And then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So to give you an idea of what this camera can actually do, here's some photos taken with the main camera. Sure, they're not exactly at the level of a $1,400 flagship phone, but at the same time, if you want to take real nice photos you can keep and use for pretty much anything, but still don't really want to spend the money on a flagship phone, then the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will definitely get the job done. Here's a couple photos taken with the ultra wide camera. Same kind of thing, definitely real good quality. Now of course, with an ultra wide camera, there's always going to be some sort of distortion around the edges, but at the same time, with this phone compared to your average mid-range phone, you don't notice it nearly as much, and I would say these pictures are absolutely usable for pretty much anything you need. Now here's a photo taken with portrait mode. Looks real nice and professional, great details, good colors, and the background is blurred really nicely. And then finally, here's a photo taken with a macro camera, and this one looks real nice as well. So overall, will this phone be able to take DSLR quality photos? Not really, but at the same time, I would say these photos are pretty much usable for anything. So if you want a mid-range phone that still takes really good photos and videos, then the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to be a great choice. Now here's a 4K test video taken with this phone. Again, the max frame rate is 30 frames per second, which in my opinion is a little disappointing because if you're really shooting a lot of high quality videos, there might be a situation where you want it to be a little smoother. Maybe you want to make something in slow motion, for example. 60 frames per second works a lot better for that. And unfortunately with this phone, if you want to record in 60 frames per second, you are going to be stuck in 1080p. Now it's really not that big a deal, but at the same time, it's one of those little things that I do think would make a bit of a difference. But overall, other than that, I do think the video quality on this phone is really good. Now with this phone, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G processor. Now for a mid-range phone, this is definitely a real fast processor. Sure, it's still not going to be anywhere near the level of something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra or an iPhone 13 Pro Max, but at the same time, it still will be able to handle pretty much anything you throw at it, whether you're browsing the web, going on social media, streaming content like videos and music, or playing a game or two. No matter what you're doing, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will be able to handle most of it perfectly fine. Now if you're doing really high performance gaming or maybe some more complex activities like video editing, then in that situation, a flagship phone is still going to be much better. But again, for your daily tasks, I've tried out pretty much everything there is to do on this phone besides the really high-end activities, and it's been able to do pretty much all of it fine. Now that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 773 and a multi-core score of 2888. Now this might not mean a whole lot to you if you're not too familiar with this kind of test, so what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, because depending on what you have, your current phone might already be faster than this one, so it's definitely a good idea to make sure this phone is an upgrade for you before getting it. But again, in my experience, this phone has been really fast, and I've done quite a bit with it. In fact, there's really not a whole lot I haven't done with it. And sure, with the higher end games and stuff, it doesn't really run nearly as well as my iPhone, for example. And even the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE I use to record these videos is still quite a bit faster. But at the same time, for a mid-range phone, I would still say this processor is really impressive. And now this kind of goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyway. As the name suggests, this phone is a 5G phone. So if you want access to your carrier's 5G network, this will be a great option. Now in this day and age, there are still a few good 4G phones out there, like the Samsung Galaxy A23 for example. I talk about that phone all the time, probably one of the best 4G phones I've seen in 2022, but still at the same time, 5G is really the future. So if you want to future-proof your device, and of course get access to the latest and greatest technology, then honestly, even if it's a little bit more pricey, a 5G phone is definitely going to give you quite a bit more value for your money. Now the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So this is definitely a large battery, and not only do we have a large battery, but we also do get pretty good fast charging. So you're going to get tons of battery life throughout the day, depending on how you use your phone, probably even multiple days. And the fast charging is going to help you charge up your phone a lot faster, and trust me, as long as you have a good fast charger, this will make a huge difference. So if you want to charge up your phone really quickly, maybe you don't have a whole lot of time, charging at 25 watts is definitely going to help quite a bit. Really, as far as the battery goes, the only thing this phone doesn't have that would be kind of nice to see is wireless charging. Now I know when it comes to mid-range phones at least, not a whole lot of people even like that feature, and sure, it definitely can be more of a novelty in certain price ranges, but I do still think wireless charging does have its uses. It's not even just a convenience feature. Say your charging port breaks, for example. Without wireless charging, you're either going to have to spend money getting it fixed or replace the phone entirely, but with wireless charging, unless you have to do some sort of data transfer, which not a whole lot of people always have to do, you can simply just charge your phone wirelessly, and that way you can keep it for a lot longer without having to replace it. So the point is, sure, wireless charging isn't going to change your life or anything, but I still do think it's a really nice feature to have. And seeing that this phone honestly is pretty pricey for a mid-range phone, it would have been nice to see that feature included here. Now with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we are getting Android 12, so definitely a nice thing getting the latest version of Android. And not only that, but Samsung A series phones are now supported for up to 5 years. So if getting the latest version of Android as it comes out is important to you, a new Samsung A series phone like this is definitely one of the better choices. And another nice feature this phone has is NFC. Now in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the main technology behind contactless mobile payment services. So if you like to make payments using tap and pay, you'll be happy to know that you can do that with this phone. But now that we've gone over some of the specs and features, let's take a closer look at the actual device itself. So on the left side here, we got nothing. On the bottom, we got the microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right side, we got the power key, volume down, volume up. On the top, we got the noise cancelling microphone, and the slot for the SIM card and the microSD card. Then on the back, we got the camera module, our flash, Samsung branding down here, and that's pretty much it. Now, one thing you'll probably notice is this phone doesn't have a headphone jack. Now for higher end and flagship phones, this is not very uncommon. In fact, most flagship phones for that matter don't have headphone jacks. But seeing that this is still technically more of a mid-range phone, it is actually a little disappointing that this phone doesn't have a headphone jack, and unfortunately that does seem to be the direction most manufacturers are moving towards. So I can imagine in the next few years, even the really entry-level phones probably won't even have headphone jacks anymore. But still, in my opinion, it is a little disappointing because even though I personally don't use wired headphones, it's always nice to have that option, and I know a lot of people out there, especially people who are buying mid-range phones, still have a classic pair of wired headphones, and being forced to get rid of them and use Bluetooth instead is definitely a big disappointment. Now of course you can get an adapter for the charging port, and that does fix the problem, but at the same time, seeing that so many consumers out there do use normal wired headphones, it doesn't make sense to me that Samsung would take away headphone jacks in their mid-range phones. And while this phone again is not officially launched in the US, there are phones like the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G for example that are officially out in the US, and that phone doesn't have a headphone jack either, so you can really see where the trend is going. And for those of you who do use wired headphones, this is definitely an unfortunate thing. But that being said, luckily there still are plenty of other mid-range phones out there that do have headphone jacks, so if that feature is important to you, definitely keep this in mind. Now as far as the rest of the design goes, I do think the phone looks real good. It's nice and sleek and modern, and although I wouldn't really say it looks premium per se, I still do think it looks really nice. Now that being said, as far as the materials go, this phone is made entirely out of plastic except of course the glass display, so there are no metal parts or anything like that. And while I'm not too bothered by this, there's really not a whole lot of weight to it, so it doesn't feel nearly as nice as it could. And if you're coming from like an older flagship phone for example, something that does have more of a glass and metal design, then this could feel like a bit of a downgrade for you. So again, it's not really that big a deal, especially since the build quality is still good. The buttons don't feel like they're gonna fall apart or anything like that. But still, again, if you have higher standards when it comes to your phone's design, definitely keep this in mind. But in conclusion, my final thoughts about the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. In general, I do think this is a really good phone. In fact, objectively, as far as performance, specs, features, all that goes, this is probably one of the best mid-range phones you can get. Now that being said, the amount of value it actually provides for the money is sort of a different story, and I will be going more in depth about that in another video. But in general, I would say if you're looking for a mid-range phone with a great camera setup, a really large high-quality display, a fast processor, a large battery, and features like NFC, the latest version of Android, and an in-display fingerprint scanner, then this phone is going to be a great choice for you. But this concludes my review of the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely stay tuned because I will be making plenty of tips and tricks videos and other videos about the phone in the near future. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.